when someone says something to you or you read words that are toxic, it can cause a shock reaction, maybe even a little panic attack. And your hypothalamic pituitary axis, which is your stress reaction, can work for you or against you in the situation. And when you breathe, you make that whole brain-body process work for you and not against you, which means that you'll control the amount of cortisol and adrenaline that's flowing in your brain. Cortisol is good for you, so is adrenaline, but too much of it will fog your mind. You won't have clear thinking. So what you want to do is breathe to defog your mind. So this is what I had to do when just the other day I got a really nasty and very unexpected email. I opened this email and I read this and it was a shock. I could feel myself like that gut reaction. I could feel my body going into toxic stress. So the first thing I did was breathe. I didn't think about what was being said. I just breathed in 3 counts or 4 counts, held it for 4 counts and breathed out. And I did that a few times until I felt much calmer. High levels of cortisol and adrenaline in your brain will make you feel freaked out and foggy, and you can just go down a rabbit hole. So first step, breathe. Now, once you've breathed and you're calmer, recognize and name your reaction. So for example, to this email that I received, I named my emotions and I started trying to describe it to myself. I feel hurt because I have blah, blah, blah. In other words, name it, recognize and name it. I'm feeling hurt, or I'm feeling attacked, or I'm feeling defensive. And then ask yourself, once you've named it, why do you feel these emotions? Why are you feeling hurt? And then answer yourself, why are you feeling attacked? Answer yourself, why are you feeling defensive? Answer yourself. I did this just for a few seconds. Don't do it for too long. Just named my emotions in a very almost clinical way. And I said, okay, I'm feeling hurt because of this and that. And I described it. Immediately, I felt more in control. Third thing, intentionally and deliberately separate the toxic emotions behind the words that you are hearing or reading and the logic of the words apart. Visualize this. So if you imagine a toxic thought like a tree, and that's kind of what they look like inside your brain. Thoughts look like trees. And a healthy thought would be like this nice green tree, and a toxic thought would be this ugly, gnarled tree with thorns all over it or whatever. So visualize these words as being this toxic tree. And visualize now ripping the emotions off this toxic tree. So suddenly this toxic tree doesn't look like the scary tree anymore. It's vulnerable. You've taken the emotions off, and now all you have there is, instead of all these thorns and ugly things, you just have a few branches that look like little burnt branches, but they're not threatening anymore. So you take the threat out of the words. You separate, take that toxic emotion out, take the threat out of the words, and just look at what are we actually dealing with here. So you start seeing the words and the information in a much clearer way. And then that will start giving you a little bit of insight, and maybe a lot of insight into what to do next. So the next step is, now you're ready to focus on the words. You'll be able to see, look at the words without those emotions, and you'll actually be able to see what's there. What is the actual problem? What is the person actually saying to you? When you look at words in this way, or you look at the sentence, or you look at the situation in this way, you're able to see it with so much more clarity. It's like when you're trying to drive through a snowstorm or torrential rain, and you don't have any windscreen wipers or they're broken. You can't see what's going on. But as soon as you separate out the logic and the emotions and take that with threatening toxicity away, what that does is it helps give you clarity. It's like putting on those windscreen wipers. And I did this with this email. I just looked at the words and I thought, okay, this person is saying X, Y, and Z. Yes, there's a bunch of emotions behind it, but I can see that they're saying X, Y, and Z. Maybe they've actually got a point. Maybe I need to look at myself. Maybe I did something to stimulate this. Maybe this, or maybe they hurt, or maybe I can offer a suggestion. And in fact, I saw that the person was frustrated, and I put myself in their shoes, and I chose to see if there was something that I could learn in myself to improve who I was as a person, and in maybe what I had said to them to cause this, or if there was something that was happening that made them react like that. And as soon as I did that, I could see, okay, this is the problem. And this led to step number 5. Which was to work out a solution in order to progress forward. So I looked at those words in the way that I just described, and I worked out how to respond to the email. I was able to put myself in the other person's shoes, and I could really see what they were trying to say, and drafted an email and sent it to them. And then they responded, and I realized that I was on the right track. And then it set up a communication, which led to a phone call, which led to a face-to-face discussion, which led to solving the problem and working out the misunderstanding. We both grew through the situation. We both improved through the situation. We both learned something through the situation. So instead of something becoming totally toxic, it actually turned into something incredibly positive. Both of us benefited from that. So instead of making a bunch of assumptions because I was hurt and talking myself into a negative hole and telling this one and telling my husband and telling my kids and saying this one, I said this and they said that, instead of me causing myself a lot of mental distress, I actually was active in identifying the problem, and then rebuilding a relationship and solving what could have become a very ugly situation. So what I did was I turned a situation around that would have been bad, not just for me, but for the other person, and would have constantly left this bad taste in our mouth, and none of us would have learned from it. So what I did there was I actually didn't build up a whole lot of toxic assumptions inside of me and live with those, which would have caused mental distress, but I actually managed to preserve a relationship. And even though we didn't agree on everything, we compatibly worked out a way forward and ended up both being extremely happy, and the situation ended up being very positive instead of negative. You see, if you let the toxic emotions grow from the spoken or written words, because whatever you think about grows in your brain and feeds back into your mind, and you got this feedback loop going. Whatever you think about is growing. So if you let the toxic emotions grow from these words, you're going to actually feel worse because of the resultant neurochemical chaos that will literally cause brain damage. We're just not wired for that. We are wired to try and resolve issues. We're wired to try and fix things. It doesn't mean you have to agree with what everyone else thinks or says, but we need to learn to agree to disagree in a kind way. We need to learn to be kind. We need to learn to be kind to ourselves and to others. You also don't know what really motivated that person's words or actions until you actually deal with it, and so on. You may be able to guess to a certain extent because obviously there's a bit of a history there, or there's a context, but you'll never really get beyond a 70% accuracy rate. And that's why it's always worthwhile going through these 5 steps. You see, if you don't, you're going to have a lot of assumptions that you're going to end up wasting a lot of time and limited mental energy on, and causing yourself a lot of mental distress. So just to quickly sum up, first step is breathe. Second step is recognize and name the reaction. Next, intentionally and deliberately separate the toxic emotions behind the words and the logic apart. Fourth step, focus on the content, the words, the logic. What can you learn from that? Which then leads you into step 5, which is whatever you've learned from that leads you to being able to work out a solution so that you can progress forward actively. Focusing on the solution also helps to reduce the effects of those toxic words or that toxic environment on you, the physical and mental effects that they caused, because you've now deconstructed it and turned it into something very constructive and healthy. Remember, it's okay to agree to disagree. Not everyone has to agree with you. Be different. It's okay, as long as we can do it with kindness.